Hey folks, it's Jeremy with the Sprawl, and thank you for joining us today here for the last of our last ditch debates. So just to give you some context before we get into things, we have done 4 of these debates this week, this being the last one, in wards where there has not been a candidate for him yet. There wasn't a forum yet, so we thought, hey, we're going to organize one. So here we have Elliot Weinstein, who's running in Ward 13. Good to see you, Elliot.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah. Appreciate you having you here. And so before we start, there's something I need to lay out some context for the viewers at home. So in the course of trying to organize these debates, we reached out to the other candidate in Ward 13. So there's only 2 candidates in Ward 13. That's the least of any ward in the city. We reached out to Dan McLean, the incumbent. He's running with the Community's First Party, and we did not get a response when it comes to participating in this debate. So we flagged it for his party, the Community's First Party. We said, hey, we sent out this invitation. Don't know if it got lost in the shuffle, but want to make sure Dan sees it. They said, okay, thanks for passing it on. We'll pass it on as well. Did not hear anything back. So we have been trying to figure out, how do you do a debate with one candidate? This is a real conundrum. And so we got to thinking, and we don't have Dan McLean here today, but who we do have is not Dan McLean. And so you're going to see not Dan McLean shortly here. So how this is going to work is I am going to actually be running the live stream. You'll hear me asking questions of the candidates from behind the camera. And I will now invite not Dan McLean to take the seat here.
Thank you.
All right, so here we go. I'm just getting set up behind the camera. And to start, we're going to do opening statements just about who you are and why you are running. And we will start with you, Elliot Weinstein. You have 90 seconds.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, not Dan McLean, for being here. Thanks for having me and for this important debate and this important election. My name is Elliot Weinstein. I have a small business in sports and recreation. I have a young family, so I have 2 kids, a 5-year-old and a 4-month-old. And so I was looking around at what was going on in the city and in Ward 13 especially. And in my opinion, what we need in Ward 13 is somebody who can actually build relationships with their peers on council. To me, that's an incredibly important aspect of what the role of a councillor is. Building relationships with your peers on council, building relationships with the communities and the people you're supposed to represent. And what I saw in Ward 13 was that wasn't happening, that we didn't have someone there who could actually work with other people across values, across ideals. And the issue, of course, is if you aren't able to work with other people when they need something in their wards, they're not going to come to you for help. But in turn, when we need something in Ward 13, there's no one to turn to because you have burned bridges and not built any relationships. And so when I saw that, I kind of looked around and decided, well, if no one's putting their hand up, it's, we need good people to step up and put their names forward. And that was my time.
All right, thank you, Elliot. And I do have a paper here that I will waive if you are going overtime. Although, since we have so few candidates, I'll try not to be too militant with that. Okay, so next up we have clearly not Dan McLean. I don't know, do you have an opening statement?
I didn't, but I found this handy little Ward 13 election zine, so I might just read Dan McLean's points here. McLean has been the councillor for Ward 13 since 2021, when he unseated longtime incumbent councillor, used to run a golf cart business called McLean Golf, volunteered for political campaigns at the federal and provincial levels, and some campaign priorities from the website are change the culture, stop the waste, address public safety. So that's what I got. I'm clearly not Dan McLean, so anything you say, is the opinion of clearly not Dan McLean.
All right. Thank you very much, not Dan McLean. Much appreciated. And just so folks know how this is going to go is not Dan McLean has actual Dan McLean's website talking points and his campaign materials. So he's going to be looking at those and kind of studying them throughout and drawing from them throughout this debate. But Elliot, let's go back to you and let's talk a bit about Ward 13 and the needs of the ward. When you think about Ward 13, is there something you can think of that the ward needs that it doesn't have right now?
So Ward 13 is certainly a growing ward, especially with some of the new parts of the city, some of the new communities that are growing down south. So I think some of the needs that we need, or some of the things that we need in Ward 13 especially, are better transit to reach everybody across the ward. And, as an entrepreneur, as a small business person myself, I think we need to see greater investment by the local community, by people there who want to open up in unique small businesses in the area that are owned locally, owned by people who live in Calgary and Ward 13. And I'd love to see a double down of investment into kind of small businesses there.
All right. Thank you, Elliot Weinstein. We're going to go now to not Dan McLean with the same question. I don't know if you have anything for this. What does Ward 13 need that it does not currently have?
Since I'm clearly not Dan McLean and not a resident of Ward 13, I don't work there, I'm just going to say what I wish more politicians would say. I don't know the answer to that, so I'm going to pass.
All right. That works. Okay, so let's get into some municipal issues here. So specifically, so the Sprawl is hosting this debate. And the Sprawl, it's kind of in our name, the issue of sprawl. And it's one of the eternal questions for Calgary when we're dealing with such an influx of population coming in. People coming in from all over the world, people coming in from all over Canada, upward of 70,000 people a year. And the question of where do you put growth? Now, you are running to represent a suburban ward. And the question is, where should growth go? Should it go on the edges of wards like Ward 13, or should it go in the inner city?
Well, I think we should be able to offer a variety of different options, frankly. There are a lot of people who want to kind of move to the edges of the city. They want to live closer to nature, closer to, have a little bit extra space in their backyard, where they can see, frankly, deer crossing through their lawns in their front and their backyards. And I've seen that a couple times on my journey throughout the ward. But a lot of people also want to live kind of closer to the action, closer to downtown, in established neighborhoods, even around Fish Creek Park, of course, where you can still see deer. I guess I should include. So I think it needs to be a combination, and how we address the issue of growth through sprawl primarily versus growth in established neighborhoods, I think is the topmost issue that we're hoping to address in this election and throughout the next 4 years. So, I think it needs to be a combination because everybody wants something a little bit different, and how we address that as councillors and as a city is what we're here for.
All right. Thank you, Elliot Weinstein. We go now to not Dan McLean, who has been studiously rifling through those notes. Do you have any insights on this, not Dan McLean?
Do you mind repeating the question? I was a little distracted by
Yeah. So the question is, it's about growth, the city's explosive growth. tens of thousands of people come to Calgary every year, upward of 70,000 people a year. And where should that growth go? That's basically the question.
Okay, great. And I forgot to say this in my introductory remarks, but we might be against urban sprawl, but a big fan of what the Sprawl's been doing. Jeremy, you've done a great job, and the cutie you've hired, like he's doing a great job too.
Oh, he's fantastic.
Yeah,
I appreciate that. I'll pass that on.
Yeah, please do. But I think we've heard this. I have this on my website, or Dan McLean does, because I'm clearly not Dan. Is that there's just lazy planning, and for Ward 13 in particular, like one of my priorities would be that the neighborhood have more gathering spaces, that we actually, because people need to go somewhere. Calgary is a great city, was a great city, and it's at this real inflection point where if the right decisions are made, if the right leadership is on council, and the people are heard, and I think for Ward 13, we really need the infrastructure that supports growth, which isn't just housing, it's transit, it's healthcare, it's grocery stores, you name it. Okay, my time's up, so I'll stop there now, but it's got to go somewhere. We'd love to have you in Ward 13.
All right, thank you, not Dan McLean. The next question is related to that one, and it is about infrastructure and taxes. So this ties very much in with growth. And the question is, we know that we have a lot of infrastructure in Calgary that needs replaced or upkeep. We also know that a lot of the outer wards need amenities that they might not have right now. So the question is, how do you approach meeting those infrastructure needs? How do you balance that with keeping taxes reasonable? So really what I want to hear is kind of some of your thinking on the issue of property taxes and infrastructure.
Yeah, and this is a wonderful and interesting question. And it, of course, it comes down to how we plan our housing strategy in the city of Calgary. As you know, Jeremy, and I know, the city collects, almost all of our revenue through property taxes. And so if we don't have an actual good housing strategy about how we grow the city, there's not going to be any money left to invest in things like infrastructure and address rising property taxes. So, as we talk about, is it growth only through sprawl? Is it growth in established neighborhoods and throughout the city? A proper, actual forward-thinking housing plan? That's how we start to talk about, well, where does our revenue come from, and how do we spend it properly, and how do we ensure that our property taxes are kept stable? One of the issues with sprawl, of course, is that, and I think we call it the donut, is that in these areas of sprawl, they don't pay enough property taxes to pay for the services that we provide for them as a city, including good transit or actual transit of any sort, garbage and compost pickup and plowing. And so if that's our only growth strategy, it's hard to envision a world where as we continue to subsidize the property taxes of sprawl growth, how we address our other infrastructure and cost needs. So I think we need to ensure that we do have an actual housing plan that involves growth in sprawl, of course, but additional growth through established neighborhoods, and how we get there and how we work with the communities and the people that live there is what I'd love to be able to talk about further and address on council.
Thank you, Elliot Weinstein. We're going to go now to not Dan McLean on the issue of property taxes and infrastructure. So I want to hear some of your thinking or your talking points, as it were, on this issue of taxes and infrastructure.
Listen, again, I'm not Dan McLean, clearly not Dan McLean, but according to Dan's website, this is under the category of stop the waste. There's out of control spending. City services are not keeping up. We need a comprehensive external audit, an organizational review of what is happening at the city. In terms of how many city staff are there, focusing on value for dollars. And that's from Dan McLean's website. Now, my own points are, in terms of we really need to focus on belonging. It's not just housing, it's not just waste, and the roles and responsibilities of a city are quite simple, but I think fundamentally we forget about the word belonging. People should feel a sense of like, this is my home. I'm proud to be from this part of the city, and yeah, so those are my personal points, but
Of clearly not Dan McLean.
Clearly not Dan McLean.
I don't know that I've ever heard actual Dan McLean speak about belonging. So it's interesting to hear
I'll
that.
always be longing for belonging, as I say.
Yes. All right. So let's go to the next question, which is, it also ties in with growth. A lot of these questions do, which is about climate and the city's climate goals and what the city is doing to approach to meet its climate goals. So the city has set its climate strategy, has set a target of net zero emissions by 2050. So I want to hear some of your thinking on that and what you would change, if anything, about how the city is pursuing its climate goals and that climate strategy.
So I'm just going to give a little bit of my own personal history. So, I graduated with my MBA from right here at the University of Calgary with a focus on energy and sustainability. And then I spent, 10 or so years volunteering on a few local and national boards, connecting environmental professionals and leading Change Canada, which are both engaged in working towards addressing climate issues, environmental and sustainability issues. So, when we talk about climate, it certainly is an important aspect for every person and every level of government to address. For Ward 13 specifically, I think the best way that we're going to address climate issues is by tackling, how we build our city and how we move around our city. So, as Jeremy said, between 70 and 100,000 people are moving here every single year. And how we grow the city is similar to how we're going to actually address climate issues. That means investing in transit, investing in housing where people can live near transit so that, we're not adding 100,000 cars to the roads per year, ensuring that we have accessible access to solar power for our homes and dealing with it that way. But yeah, I think it's like how we build our city, homes, transit, and limiting the number of cars on the city as far as a city perspective goes.
All right. Thank you, Elliot Weinstein. We're going to go now to not Dan McLean on the question of the city's climate strategy and what it's doing to pursue its climate goals. So I want to hear your thinking or your talking points on what, if anything, you would change about what City Hall is doing on this file.
Yeah, no, thank you. I wish I had my track record. Dan McLean has been in City Council since 2021, so I wish I had Dan's, track record voting on these issues. I don't. But, just glancing through the website as well as the notes from the website, climate change or the climate emergency strategy, it's not mentioned. It is left out of the text. There is transit safety in there. Listen, Calgary is, one of the big cities, one of the two big cities of Alberta. Alberta is oil and gas, my family, also has a history with oil and gas. And I think we need to figure out what is an investment and what is a cost when it comes to climate mitigation and climate strategies. Because investing in something like transit now, how does that affect our congestion? How does that affect the quality of life? So those are some of the things I'm thinking about in terms of climate strategy, in terms of the city, given that it is, corporate city for oil and gas province. I would argue that we maybe need to be more ambitious. We know how much insurance has cost Calgarians because of hail, because of weather-related incidents in recent years. You could argue that the Alberta floods in 2013 were also part of what's, the climate is changing. And I think it's just a question of can we change with it changing?
All right. That was clearly not Dan McLean, and a very clearly not Dan McLean answer on that question. So let's keep going here and thinking about city council. So whichever councillor is elected, you're going to be part of a city council with 14 other people, some of whom you will agree with, some of whom you will not. And regardless of that, you're stuck with these folks, and you've got to figure out how to work with people. So the question is, how do you deal with working with people you disagree with? And can you point to something in your experience that shows that you can do this?
I mean, what a great question. And this kind of brings back to my original point of how we build relationships and work with each other on council. That's the I think a very important aspect of what we do on council. I have a small business. I have employees and customers and peers that we work with. We have up to 1,000 people coming through our doors every week. And building relationships is key to that business, to my personal life, working with people of different values and ideals. And here we are in Alberta, of course. There's lots of conservatives and liberals, but we all have to work together, and that's what I've done throughout my personal career, my personal journey. So when we get to council, it's about building relationships with those people, working with people that you might disagree with your values and ideals. But that's what we're there for. And so if we can't build those relationships, I don't think can be a functioning member of council, and that's why I'm here, what I'd love to see change about Ward 13 representation.
All right, thank you, Elliot Weinstein. We're going to go to not Dan McLean and not Dan McLean. I want you to stick to your talking points, okay? I understand you're not Dan McLean, but is there any material on this one regarding the functioning of city council?
Sure, absolutely. No, thank you. You're doing a good job moderating, and that was a good response, Elliot. I think stop the waste, out of control spending. From Dan McLean's website, operational expenditures at the city have surged from 3.98 billion to 5.38 billion. That's a 35% increase. City services are clearly not keeping up. Roads, water infrastructure, green spaces, pathways, transit. All city services seem to be in a state of decline. How is that possible with increasing expenses? As I mentioned earlier, from Dan McLean's website, we need a comprehensive outside audit to ensure taxpayer dollars are being spent responsibly. The number of employees has ballooned at the city. So let's identify redundancies and inefficiencies in our operations. All right.
Okay, so I hear what you're saying. This isn't exactly addressing the question of how you would work with other councillors, but you might not have that material.
No,
handy.
I don't think I do. Maybe just a thing that increased transparency. There are too many closed sessions. Discussions, impacting Calgarians should happen with public oversight, and that I will demand more. Dan McLean will demand more transparency.
All right, so there we go. That is clearly not Dan McLean. All right, so Elliot, let's talk about this election. And this election's different than previous ones. Previously, if you were running as a candidate, it would be independently, as with all candidates. This election, the province has introduced municipal parties in Calgary and Edmonton, only in Calgary and Edmonton. And Ward 13, I don't have this in front of me, but maybe Ward 13 might be the only ward where all candidates are party candidates. There is not an independent option in the ward. So can I just get your response and your thinking on why you're part of a party, and is that a good idea or not?
Yeah, you bet. I have been working with Brian Thiessen, the mayoral candidate with the Calgary Party, for over a year now. We've been working on policies together, coming up with ideas together, as well as the other of course Calgary Party teammates. The reason I joined a party, in my opinion, politics, and especially municipal politics, is a team sport. Nothing gets done alone, which is of course why relationships are so important on council. So nothing gets done alone. and you need to be able to work together with your teammates. I joined the Calgary Party. I'm running alongside Brian Thiessen because I was looking forward to building those relationships in advance of the election, and of course afterwards when I'm there on council. When you do get elected, it can take up to 6 to 8 months or so, is what everyone tells me, to understand where people are at, your peers on council, and what the priorities are. But we've kind of skipped over that. We've been working together for a year already, and so we kind of have those relationships built. So now when I do get elected, I have relationships with people that I can work with. But of course, whomever gets elected is who we're going to work with, and I look forward to that.
All right, thank you, Elliot. And not Dan McLean, if you can keep it brief. I don't know if you have anything there on this issue.
I got nothing.
All right, nothing on the party issue. Another kind of how City Hall functions question is about the relationship between City Council and administration. And this has come up in this election campaign. The question of who's driving the bus at City Hall and who should be driving the bus. So I'd like to get your thinking on, number one, how you would kind of grade the current council on its approach to that relationship, and what, if anything, you would want to see changed. How do you see that relationship? Whoops, sorry, I didn't switch my thing. How do you see that relationship between council and administration?
So I think the issue we're trying to get at right here is like council and admin feels a little bit broken right now. And in my opinion, that's because we have a council that doesn't function very well at this moment. And that includes the mayor's office all the way down to Ward 13. We have people who seemingly even get along, but don't work very well together. And I think that's an issue that across the board, people just haven't been able to build those relationships with each other, haven't been interested in it. There's been poor leadership, in my opinion, from the top, and poor leadership from our representative in Ward 13. So I think it requires council to get back to, bring some adults together, sit at the table, and actually be able to work together and want to work together. I think, if we can change the culture on council, that's how we start to change the culture of how admin is working. Right now, it certainly feels like because council's broken and admin is just kind of doing their thing, doing whatever they feel is best for whatever they're working on. And there's nobody really to guide the ship. And that is my primary priority here, is to change the culture on council, change the culture with admin, make sure that the communities we're representing feel like they are listened to, and get back to work.
All right, thank you, Elliot Weinstein. We're going to go now to not Dan McLean. I don't know if you have anything on this, on the relationship between council and administration.
Not specifically. I think there's just a section from Dan McLean's website which is just change the culture. So I'm happy to expand on that a little.
Sure, let's hear a bit of it.
Sure. So, under the change the culture, let's restore trust. Trust among residents seems to have plummeted in recent years. According to some surveys, it's time to listen. Let's remember that the city's role is to be a public servant. The residents are the boss, and then ultimately it ends with leadership, that a change in leadership in city administration is needed. According to Dan McLean's website, the current leadership needs to be held accountable for the collapse of the culture at City Hall.
All right, thank you, not Dan McLean. Now I want to have you kind of imagine, we're talking about City Hall, imagine walking out of City Hall, going west down Stephen Avenue, and you can see, you don't have to walk far to see various degrees of human suffering in the downtown core specifically. And I don't know how much of an issue this is in Ward 13 when we're talking about the opioid crisis, when we're talking about homelessness, etc. But I want to get your thinking on that issue and public safety. How do you approach that issue, and what do you think City Hall should be doing? Elliot Weinstein.
Excuse me. this issue affects people in Ward 13 and across the city, certainly. When we think about the unhoused and the homeless population downtown, and that, essentially people are now using transit and especially the train as a shelter. And of course, the red line comes down and does terminate down in Ward 13. And so I've heard from a number of people across Ward 13 that they don't want to use transit because it feels unsafe. And we want to figure out how to solve this real serious problem for everybody, really, for people who are unhoused, people who are living downtown, people using transit. And what it comes down to is a housing first policy. I know, for myself and my Calgary Party team, we have a housing first policy, which just means, let's prioritize housing for people who need it. This is, for the unhoused population, but really across economic status, conditions. It's a housing first priority. People who don't have a house or somewhere to sleep essentially will end up sleeping wherever they want, and certainly that includes on the train and in bus shelters and in apartment alcoves. So if we can, provide some stable housing for people who need it, not only is that the right thing to do on a human basis, but frankly, it's the fiscally prudent thing to do. It's cheaper to house people and provide wraparound mental health and addiction services, provide legal and health services, than it is to leave things the way they are. When we think about emergency access to healthcare, we think about policing, and frankly, the toll it's taking on the police right now as well.
All right, thank you, Elliot Weinstein. Clearly not Dan McLean. I don't know, do you have anything on this particular issue?
Yes, thank you. Yep, we have a section on, Dan McLean's website has a section on mental health, addiction, and homelessness, and, outlines the rise in social needs, the lack of spaces, the progress being made, and also, the city's role, which is, largely outlined as, ensuring that lands are available, that space is made available for required resources. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, not Dan McLean. All right, so in a debate like this, I have my questions that I've been asking. I don't live in Ward 13. Ward 13 is a long way for me, where I live in Ward 9. And so as we've been talking to different people in the wards, we come up with questions we think are interesting, but I want to put it to you. What do you think we should be talking about on the municipal level that we haven't brought up in this discussion? What comes to mind, if anything?
Yeah. To be honest, the main issues that people are asking about are, of course, housing, transit, transportation, safety, and community safety, and property taxes. Lots of people, of course, are concerned with the teacher strike right now, which we don't really talk about at a municipal level, but I think the way that we should be talking about provincial issues and municipal issues is, frankly, that we need a council that functions. We need a council that works together, and when appropriate, we need a council that can push back against provincial overstep into municipal issues. Of course, the Premier talks a lot about Ottawa's overstep here into Alberta, and likewise, we should be talking about the provincial overstep here into municipal issues. We're talking about bike lanes and defunding our police. I'm happy to have discussions about multi-use pathways and bike lanes, but that's our discussion to have. And so I think, how we push back, how we address that is having a council that works, that can work together, that can push back against the provincial government where it's appropriate for us to do so.
All right. Thank you, Elliot Weinstein. Put the same question to you, not Dan McLean, very clearly not Dan McLean. Is there anything that we have not talked about here that we should be talking about, that you can glean from Dan McLean's talking points specifically, his campaign materials?
I think we've talked around it or close to it, but from Dan McLean's website and talking points, just figuring out how to strengthen our communities, the impact of the pandemic, the decline in community associations, the reduced role in development and funding cuts, once again from Dan McLean's website, of community associations. Local residents know what is best for their communities. This is in quotes. We need strong community associations to have thriving communities. Let's support more gathering spaces and, communities first. Let's emphasize community involvement and engagement in decisions, prioritize policies to bring communities back to the table.
All right. Thank you very clearly, not Dan McLean. And I think that pretty much wraps it up for this debate. What we're going to do is go to closing statements. And for this, I think it is only fair, with all due respect to you, you're clearly not Dan McLean, I think we are just going to do closing statements with the candidate who did show up today. So that is Elliot Weinstein. Yeah, clearly not Dan McLean is out of the picture. Elliot Weinstein is here. And go ahead, make your pitch to the voters of Ward 13.
Yeah. Obviously, I've talked a lot about building relationships throughout this debate. And, that is, I think, one of my key priorities is to get onto council, to be able to work with the people that we've chosen as a city to represent us. And those relationships are incredibly important. And frankly, I don't believe we've seen that over the last 4 years, somebody who can actually work with other people, especially those who, they have different values or ideals with. My real final 2 points here in closing is, the first one is communication is incredibly important. That's why I'm here talking with the Sprawl and with everybody who's watching and everybody who will watch after is, how we communicate with the people we're supposed to represent is incredibly important. That means receiving communication, but also giving communication. And so I think one thing I would like to commit to is regular updates about what's happening on council, how I'm voting, if I'm voting for or against things, and how those are proceeding, because people want to know what's happening. And certainly as we go, sometimes I'll vote for things that pass or won't pass. But I think that is incredibly important, and that's why I'm here, and because communication is key. The second point I'd like to make is just we need more investment in recreation facilities in Ward 13 and really across the city. Obviously, my business background is in recreation right now. So I'd love to be able to kind of prioritize investment in recreation, investment in space for recreation. That includes green space and parks and fields and sports fields. And, I know we have the Belmont Field House that was just announced, but that, let's keep in mind that came from a vote that happened pre-2021. And that's it. I think, let's build back our relationships. Let's have people who can work functionally on council and work together. Let's communicate properly between the people we represent and ourselves. And let's invest in sports and recreation. That's how we keep ourselves healthy. That's how we keep our families and our communities healthy. And that's what I like to bring to City Council.
All right. Thank you, Elliot Weinstein. So that wraps up this Ward 13 debate. Elliot, I want to say thank you for being here today. So we actually, like I said, this is the fourth of these ward debates that we've done in this week in wards that hadn't had any debates. And for most of these, we've had most of the candidates show up. Ward 13, we actually have the lowest quota of candidates to show up because we have only 1 out of 2 who is here. We have you and not Dan McLean. So I appreciate you coming in. I appreciate you making the time for this. And to everybody who's watching at home, thanks for tuning in. You can see the rest of our live streams on the Sprawl's YouTube channel. And don't forget to vote on Monday.
And I guess I just want to also thank you for putting this on, doing all this work that you've done over the past little bit for the election. It's obviously very important. So yeah, get out and vote.
And thank you as well to Asad Chishti, who was not Dan McLean today. Very clearly, not only not Dan McLean, but very clearly not Dan McLean. So I appreciate you doing that. All right. Thanks, folks, and see you later.